I'm joined now by TRT World's executive producer of our Off the Grid series, Alexandra Pauliat, is here with me. And in Paris, the EU affairs expert, Alexis Poulin, joins us from there. Alexis is also the founder of the Modern World News website. Alexis, thank you very much indeed for joining us from Paris. Bear with me for a moment, because I want to start with my colleague, Alexandra. For me, personally fascinating that you, a French national, should have made this documentary about this yellow vest movement. We've seen 13 consecutive weeks of protests across the country. What stood out for you as a French person going to cover your country, which is having protests, which I believe are probably the biggest protests in the country since those 1960s student riots in Paris?
I mean, they are quite unprecedented. And although, I mean, France, like my country, is a country that is no stranger to protest at all, we are quite used to it. We're quite used to like seeing people taking to the streets to demonstrate against like the government policy or whatever else. But this one was really different, and it was really different first by the kind of like the level of violence that's basically occurred at the beginning of December. I think came as a huge surprise to many people. I mean, we had like those yellow vests occupying like roundabouts for like 3 weeks or so, a bit of demonstration in Paris and big cities, but then all of a sudden in every single international TV network, you could see like the pictures of Paris on fire, basically. People on the Champs-Élysées, people on one of the wealthiest areas of France, like getting very angry. So I think that's the first thing that basically like really struck me, and that was one of the reasons why we decided that we should go and try to find out that what is really going on behind the violence. So going to Paris at first, then I decided to go immediately outside of Paris, because what is very different between this movement and others as well is like this movement is really deeply rooted outside of the capital and outside of big cities. So, and then we spent a lot of time on roundabouts talking to like people, normal people, about their frustration, the reason why they were so unhappy. And what really surprised me was to see the level of public support that they were enjoying. Everybody was like stopping, talking to them. And it looked like all of a sudden, I was discovering a kind of like completely different aspect of my country. Like realizing all of a sudden that millions of people basically didn't have money on the 10th of the month, if not the beginning of the month. So I think that was one of the most surprising things for me.
Alexandra, some of the best information I've gotten from you while you've been working through to the final product of this documentary has come while we've been standing around the coffee machine, and I'm going to bring out some of those facts. So you talk about how much money people earn, but let's go to Alexis now. Alexis, is this the support that Alexandra is talking about? Is it truly emblematic of a national movement? Many people have said that the outside world has slightly got it wrong, that it's not quite the revolution that TV news networks are portraying.
There is still a majority support in the French population for the Yellow Vest movement, above 55%, and it was 60%, and above 70% at the beginning of the movement. So it's still there, and it says a lot about the invisible people of France that decided to put on the Yellow Vest, because whenever you switch on the television or read the newspaper, it never talks about the reality of the lives of these people in the region or in big cities, meaning that it's difficult, even with a job, to finish the month, to raise your kids, and to look for a brighter future. So I think the support is still there. It's something that is very rooted in the French population, but not only the French population. I would say that it's something that you can see worldwide. It started maybe with Occupy Wall Street to some extent, where people realized that it's always the same people paying for the riches that actually try to avoid taxes and make sure that politicians and regulation go in their interests. So this is another peak of this ongoing revolution, which is the Yellow Vest movement, and it's about protesting about injustice, tax injustice, but also in general the way politics and people being elected don't reply to the anguish and the anger of these people in the streets.
Okay, Alexis, answer me this, and then Alexandra, you tell me what you found from the people you spoke to on this particular subject. The Yellow Vest movement doesn't have a very defined leadership. If you look at the EU elections that are coming up, the Yellow Vest movement has at least 3 separate lists, which shows possibly that it doesn't have the unity of a real political movement, certainly not of a political party. So does that lack of unity suggest that people are quite clearly angry at Macron, at the whole of the system? And it's easy to be angry, but it's, of course, more difficult to come up with solutions. Does this lack of unity and these different voices that claim to be speaking for anyone who wears a gilet jaune, a yellow vest, does that make it more difficult to come up with solutions?
Yes, definitely. There is something with this movement that is new, is that this movement doesn't want to go into politics. They don't want to be politicians, and they don't trust politicians anymore. The Yellow Vest people that want to go into politics are disavowed by the other Yellow Vest protesters, saying they are not one of us. They are betraying the movement. The goal of the movement is not to finish as a political party, because it's all about saying that political parties are not answering anymore the needs of the populations. So it's not the end of the movement to transform into a political party. And if you look at leaderships, of course you have several known figures that are speaking on TV and trying to organize the movement, but they don't want to be seen as leaders. It's something that is very clear. If you look at Eric Boulot or Jérôme Rodriguez, who's been hurt and lost an eye in a protest, they don't want to be politicians, and they don't want to be seen as charismatic leaders. They just want to be here to actually say what the other people can't say, or make sure that the revendication of the Yellow Vest are heard and clearly understood by the political elite.
But heard by whom exactly? I mean, or who is Macron expecting to hear from? If he's opened a grand debate, he could be hearing from tens of millions of people with some general idea that they want their lives to be better.
Yeah, but I think that's actually the idea behind this grand debate. I mean, I completely agree with Alexis when he said that this movement is deeply anti-establishment. The last thing they want, I mean, they are against Macron government, they have very strong words. I mean, I don't think we've heard anything that violent against a French president in a very long time. But it's not only against Emmanuel Macron and its government, it's against the political system in general. It's all about like the disconnect that they feel that exists between them and the people who are supposed to represent them. So they know that the risk is to basically become a political party and then not to be the kind of like popular movement, if you will, that they want to be. Now, on the other hand, I mean, I met some of the people who are now leaders, and even if they don't agree and if they don't like you to call them leaders, that's actually what are they de facto becoming. So that's when it's going to be a bit difficult for the movement to kind of like survive and to unite. Most probably what you're going to see is a movement that is going to get fragmented, with some people who are going to follow the people who want to go like on the political side, and then you will always have like the people who were suffering, who took to the street just because they wanted more money and less taxes, and who might have the feeling at the end of the day that they're not represented anymore.
You told me you met somebody who earns €1,300 a month. You told me about a farmer who, after paying his bills, has how many euro a month to live on?
€200 a month left after paying for all the taxes. What we have to say is like, we met a lot of people, and we realized that the minimum wage in France is roughly €1,300 right now. And it's far from being enough. I mean, with all like the taxes who really have been up for like the past few years. So you have the feeling that more and more people are struggling, and earlier in the months. Now you've got this very kind of like French specificity of like the farmer cases. And in the case of the farmer, we met a few of them as well. And I mean, especially this one that is featured in the documentary, and that really like showed us. I mean, we saw all his accounts or whatever. After, he doesn't make much money to start with, but he still has to pay almost 60% taxes. and then another 20% taxes. And then at the end of the day, he's left with basically 200, as you say. So...
Okay, let's pick up on this issue of finances, okay, both personal finances and government finances. Alexis, so there's also a clip I heard while I was reading the news a few weeks ago, an elderly man saying, I don't have enough money to be able to take my grandchildren to McDonald's. I mean, that's like a basic thing in the West, to be able to buy a Big Mac for your grandkids, right? But Alexis, some people say the French government is bust, that actually Macron can't solve these people's problems because, like in many Western capitalist countries, the debt reservicing is so expensive that actually he doesn't have the money to spend the amount that he would have to spend to satisfy these people's demands, some of which are very basic, just make our lives a little bit better.
Yeah, it's a problem of course, the state public debt. It's how much money you can spend in public services to make sure that life is easier for a lot of these people. Free school, free health insurance, transport, education, of course. All this is part of the equation. The problem is, where do we get the money? Where are the taxes? And so far, the taxes are always been to the workers and saying, we'll tax the workers, but we won't tax the capital, or we won't tax the rest because, you know, they make us elected. They pay for the campaign and we are friends. Macron is in this trouble because he started his mandate by suppressing the tax on the riches, the ISF. And this is all where it started saying, why is it always us, the middle class, the lower class, that have to pay for the other who can actually manage tax evasion or tax optimization?
Yeah.
This has to end. It's all about justice and saying, if you look at tax evasion, it's about 80 billion euro that you could get into the state budget. What Macron can't do, apart from trying to tackle tax evasion, is make sure that employment is raising in France and that you get paid for your job. If you look at the past decades, all governments in Europe have been working hard and making sure that you don't get paid much more for your work, and the price of work is staying at a lower standard, because then you get employment. If it's too expensive to pay workers, then there won't be creation of jobs. That's
Alexis,
what economics people that are actually, yes.
We're running out of time, and I want to ask
Yeah.
you, as an EU affairs expert, how many other leaders around the EU are going to be looking at Macron's situation and thinking that actually this is a crisis of capitalism? The system that is in place in most of the Western world actually is now proving that it can't take care of the majority of the people, and those problems in France might be coming to my country next. Fairly briefly, if you could, please.
I think everybody's looking at this crisis like, oh, look, after Macron, there will be a European Trump or a French Trump saying that enough is enough. We can't do with this world business game where the people that are actually working are not earning enough for a living. The question is, how do you change the system and move from this capitalism to another one that is more close to the people and make sure that everybody is winning? Emmanuel Macron can't answer on his own, and even the European Union, with all that has been built in the past 50 years, can't answer. If you look at the Brexit issue, the migration issue, we're still in a crisis time. So it will take a lot of years before you actually turn the system to make it work for everyone.
Okay, one final question to you, Alexandra, and I want to play the pictures that we have of last Saturday of left and right-wing elements of yellow vests fighting each other. So it comes back to what we were talking about a lack of unity. Did you find that? Or were people that you were speaking to so sort of set apart from the politics and were simply addressing their own particular issues in their daily lives? Because that disunity is really something that, as we've discussed over these past 12, 14 minutes, is a problem not only for Macron, but also for the yellow vests themselves.
I think the disunity is probably more during the protest. And what we have to remember is, like, the majority of the yellow vest people are not going to protest in big cities for various reasons. But what I saw really on the runabouts was a lot of solidarity. And that was really like what people were saying as well, is like, we don't feel alone now. We just realize that other people feel exactly the same way. So it's basically us and the government and us people, like 80% of France, almost a kind of like 99% that we can even like talk about. So, I mean, I think, yes, in Paris or in other big cities, you can see some kind of like tensions between protesters. But I would say that as a movement, from what I saw, it was still quite united.
Alexandra, look forward to watching the programme. Alexis, thank you very much indeed for joining us from Paris. Right, just to remind you that this documentary, Off the Grid, The Yellow Vests Driven by Despair, it's called. It premieres this Saturday, 16:30 GMT here on TRT World, and Alexandra really wants you to watch it.